Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and shortly I will be catching up with Chief International Correspondent Lyse Doucet because there is big news about the conflict between Iran and the US. A so-called peace deal has been signed between the two sides, but there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. Or is it less to it than meets the eye? Because we actually don't know what the details are. And lots of people are saying it's not actually a full-on peace deal. Lyse will bring us up to speed. But first of all, the main subject we're going to discuss on this episode of Newscast. Keir Starmer summoned the press to Downing Street at breakfast time to announce the government's response to its consultation on new regulations for social media for teenagers and young people. The main headline is that from about spring next year, we think there is going to be a ban on under 16s using a whole load of social media apps. And the government's also looking into various other restrictions for other age groups, including things like anonymous messaging on games apps and that infinite scroll, which means you can just keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And also, they're looking at the idea of a curfew where apps are not available for teenagers after a certain time of day. And clearly, the government have been inspired by Australia, where they introduced a ban on social media for teenagers a few months ago, and the entire world is watching to see how that's going. Although the government here say they're actually going even further than Australia. So to help us understand what might be coming down the social media technology pipeline, we're joined by the BBC's technology editor here in the studio, Zoe Kleinman.
Hello.
And she's reuniting across the airwaves with Henry Zeffman at Westminster. Hello, Henry.
Hello. Yes, Zoe and I were in Downing Street very early this morning. And I think when both of us are in the same place, it reflects that technology and politics are coinciding in a very big way right now.
And Henry, just in terms of the choreography, this was a thing that the government's done before, which is try to crash breakfast news on BBC One at the peak viewing time, 8:10.
Yeah, and they've done it a handful of times. Actually, the most recent example I can remember is Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, essentially all but announcing that she was going to put up income tax, which she then didn't do, which sparked all sorts of political fallout. But look, it's a natural communication strategy, isn't it? Especially given that this is targeted as an announcement, not at kids, but at parents. And it's a time of day when lots of parents are engaging with the news and, got the government big coverage. Though, of course, this is an announcement of such significance, they could have announced it at any time of day, probably in any format. And a lot of people would have stood up and paid attention.
And Zoe will dig into the details. And there's quite a lot of details, although maybe not as much detail as we'd like. But do you want to just sort of frame what Keir Starmer was trying to achieve with all of this?
So he's gone for the under 16 social media ban, which I think everybody knew he was going to do. There's been an enormous pressure from campaigners, from bereaved parents, from parents in general, actually, who are very worried about what's going on with their children when they're online and whether they're safe enough. And the government's been very clear for ages, hasn't it, that it's not a matter of, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I think, obviously, there's a little bit of broader politics at play that Henry can talk far more about, but it seems like the moment is now for Sir Keir Starmer to perhaps set this out as his legacy. So what are we seeing? We're seeing social media ban for under 16s. This is all very closely modelled on the Australia ban. So if you've been following that, that's pretty much what we're going to get here as well. However, we are going further. It's been described as Australia Plus, and here's why. Because some of the measures will target under 18s. So we're going for 16 and 17-year-olds as well in some of the additional stuff that they want to bring in.
And so in terms of the ban, are they setting out particular apps that this will apply to, or is it a more kind of generalised way of describing it? And the reason I asked that question is that Jess Phillips was on Newscast last week, and she was saying, a problem with the Australian system is it's just a list of particular apps, and she would have preferred something where you just talk about kind of the service that's being offered online.
So we are following the Australia list. There are 10 apps that are on it, and they include, all the ones you'd expect, really, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube is on it, X, all of the big ones, basically. And then there's also Snapchat as well. Thank you. But there's also a list of apps that are not on it. And some of those have been quite surprising as well. So gaming is not included. So Roblox is not part of the ban. Messaging apps are not part of the ban. So WhatsApp is also not included. Discord, which is a gaming forum, also not part of the ban. So it's as interesting to see who's in as who's out.
Yeah, and some of those other titles like Roblox, they might be affected by some of the other measures that are going to come in later, like the ban on anonymous people being able to message a teenager. And what are they going to do about infinite scrolling?
Well, we don't know yet. I suspect something is coming for infinite scrolling, and that might even be an under 18 measure. And that is the idea that, the whole doom scrolling thing that keeps you there because you never, ever run out of content to see. They want to get rid of that for children in order to get them off the apps sooner, I suppose. So we will see later on, to what extent they're going to go for that. But it is very much about stripping out functionality. And the big one, of course, is they're going to ban children from live streaming. And that is on any platform. So even on Roblox, for example, where they're allowed to be, they won't be able to live stream on it at all.
And Henry, in terms of the process of making this the law, we know that the government can actually move quite quickly, or relatively quickly, in terms of how Parliament works, because they've given themselves some powers in advance to implement this.
Yes. So actually, we think the main provisions that the government has announced can be introduced by what's called secondary legislation. That's to say, it won't follow the full parliamentary process going through multiple stages in the House of Commons and then multiple stages in the House of Lords. It won't require its own Act of Parliament called the Social Media Under 16s Restrictions Act or something like that. And that is why Sir Keir Starmer, I think, was reasonably... it was reasonable for him to be confident in saying, in answer to Zoe's question, in fact, that he expects this to be in force in the spring of 2027. I think given the parliamentary process around this, as well as actually the level of political consensus that there now is, when he says that, we can be pretty sure, at least if he is still Prime Minister, that is the timetable the government is going to end up being able to deliver this over.
And let's hear a bit of the Prime Minister in his own words in Downing Street on Monday morning.
Today is a big moment for our country. This is a big step, real change for our children and our future. Because today I can announce that the government will ban access to social media for all children under the age of 16.
I feel the Prime Minister wants us to get the message that he's being decisive there. Zoe, just in terms of the choreography of the event, who's actually doing the applauding there? Because I'm guessing that's not Westminster journalists doing that.
No, it wasn't us. I was actually sitting behind a group of campaigners, including bereaved parents, and they were applauding. I took their photo on the steps of Number 10 before we went in, and they were absolutely jubilant because they've been fighting for this for years. And they say they feel like it's been a David and Goliath battle against these multi-billion-dollar tech companies in the US. And they have really struggled to, in their opinion, protect children. One of them said when they all met Keir Starmer last week, we don't want anyone else to join our group because it is a very tragic group that they're in. And they are absolutely delighted that this has happened. I have to say, though, before you go into Number 10, as you will know, you have to surrender your phones. And I had massive anxiety about being separated from my phones. And I thought maybe this is a little insight into how the nation's 13 to 16-year-olds are feeling right now.
We'll feel from spring next year and then the other things being phased in afterwards. Zoe, just in terms of the practicalities of how this will work, you suddenly realise the easy bit is saying this is what's going to be implemented. The much harder bit is actually working out then how it will happen. Because isn't one of the logical conclusions of this that everyone, no matter what age you are, if you want to access TikTok or Snapchat or YouTube, you will have to prove your age to show that you're not under 16?
I think it's quite possible that we will see something like that. Certainly, the age verification has been criticised in Australia, and one of the reasons for that, I think, is that it's not essential. So it kicks in if something is flagged rather than kicking in for absolutely everybody. And I think that might be how some children have managed to hold on to their accounts. So we will be probably seeing a tougher version of it.
Oh, so in Australia, it's not an automatic thing where you have to, do a 3D scan of your face to get access to TikTok?
So my understanding is that it's not essential that some children haven't hit it or they managed to get round it. I mean, there are always ways, as we know, around everything. I thought it was really interesting that the Prime Minister compared this to laws around drinking alcohol, which of course is for over 18s. And he said, we do know that people under 18 also drink, but we know that the law prevents it on lots of occasions, and that's why we do it. We haven't given up on the drinking laws. And so I think he is being realistic about it, that it's not likely to completely solve this problem, but it might help.
And Henry, in terms of how these regulations are designed, it'll be interesting to see, do they go down the route of basically just putting a very strict duty on the providers of these services that they've got to stop under 16s being on them if they're covered by the ban, or they've got to stop under 18s using certain tools if that's what then gets restricted, or whether the government is very, very precise about what's going to go on here.
Yeah, and clearly that is where things get a bit trickier for the government, and that is where there's ample scope for the political consensus that has formed on the broad principle to fracture. Just in the last half an hour or so, Sir Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, whose party has been pushing for a ban, is saying that he is worried that the government has come up with a half-baked policy that won't keep children safe. I think the argument he's essentially making is that the government has rushed this out for political purposes and therefore hasn't quite thought through the answers to questions like the one you just posed me.
And Reform have been making the point, I think it was Robert Jenrick was doing a speech today saying that he and Nigel Farage think a better answer would be kind of dumb phones for under 16s. So actually you just can't access the apps at all via the device.
Yes, that's right. And there will be a range of other positions. I think the Conservative Party, which probably launched off the kind of politics of this when Kemi Badenoch backed a full ban sort of first thing this year. I think they've been perhaps the least begrudging, as it were, of the other political parties who've been pushing for a version of this and have said they'll support the government all this, although they're very cynical about the reasons that Sir Keir Starmer has announced it now. But look, just to re-emphasise, the government doesn't have to follow a full act of Parliament on this. They have, though it's easy to forget it, a massive majority in Parliament, and the vast majority of Labour MPs, as far as I can tell, are supportive of what Keir Starmer has announced today, and that's not necessarily something we've always been able to say.
Zoe, I won't get you to sum up the response of every single tech company in the world, but what are some of the themes emerging from their responses?
So first of all, they all say that they are committed to protecting children, as you would expect. And a lot of them point out that they have already introduced parental controls and blocked access to things that have been found to be harmful. The vibe I get from them is that they will be supportive if they feel that it's fair to all of them. And I'm not convinced that they do feel that it's fair today. I think they were expecting a bit more. I think they were also expecting Apple and Google to have to do the age verification at phone level, and that doesn't seem to have happened. So now they're going to have to find a way to do it, and it's going to have to be a better way than what they're doing in Australia. And I think from what I'm hearing, that's come as a bit of a surprise, certainly to some of them.
Well, because the argument for doing it at device level is that you would basically prove your age on your phone, and then that gives you access to the services, as opposed to having to prove your age to every app that you want to use.
Exactly right. So the idea is, if you are aged between 13 and 15 and you go on the App Store, you won't even see the apps. They won't be there. They'll be blocked from you at device level. And of course, the other argument is, if you remove children's access to these apps, well, where do they go instead? There are some smaller, less regulated, zero protection places out there, chat forums, gaming platforms, that there is a concern that the tech companies say, well, at least on these big ones, that we are under scrutiny and we are doing a lot, whereas on these other ones, nobody's looking at them and nobody knows about them. Is that a bigger threat?
And will teenagers who have accounts on these apps now just have them switched off one day in spring next year?
Well, that's what happened in Australia, isn't it? They just hit a wall.
Yeah.
But they did manage to get over that wall quite a few
Yes. And in terms of the Australian experience, I keep hearing, the evidence is very mixed. And I'm not sure what the evidence on either side actually is, other than to say it's mixed.
Yeah, so I guess, in its favour, the eSafety Commission says that nearly 5 million children's accounts were disabled when the ban was introduced in December. That's a lot. Less good is the fact that 7 out of 10 children that had accounts then still seem to have at least some of them now.
7 out of 10.
That's what the reports say.
Right.
Yes. So it has obviously done something, and millions of accounts being disabled is not insignificant, is it? However, it does also appear that lots of children have found ways to avoid it. Either they're using something like VPNs, or they just haven't hit the age verification for whatever reason.
And Henry, I'm just thinking back to that clip of Starmer that we played, and I mean, he's not a guy that gets excited or passionate about things really, other than Arsenal. But this is something he seems very excited about. But then you think, well, actually, that suits him politically, because if he's fighting for his political life, this is probably quite a good weapon to have at his arsenal in that fight.
Yeah, there was language in a portion of the sort of opening speech about not backing down and delivering this however hard it might be, which I don't think was really specifically about this issue. I think it was about the broader political predicament that he finds himself in. And look, it's been clear for some time that the government is going to end up in this place. It's been clear for some time that the government was going to make the announcement of whatever this policy turned out to be before the summer. But why did they do it today? Well, they did it today because this is the start of what could prove a really pivotal week for the Prime Minister. And I don't just mean that he's going to the G7 Summit of World Leaders in France later today, important though that is. It's because when he comes back, he will find out on Thursday night, Friday morning, whether Andy Burnham, currently the Mayor of Greater Manchester, is going to be the MP for Makerfield. And if he is, then events could move quite quickly, and the Prime Minister will need an argument to fall back upon as he makes the case to Labour MPs for why they should leave him in office. And make no mistake, this announcement today will form part of that argument.
And of course, for Andy Burnham to make it to Westminster to then potentially challenge Keir Starmer as Prime Minister, he has to win the Makerfield by-election, which will be decided by voters in Makerfield on Thursday. Andy Burnham will have to beat Robert Kenyon of Reform UK to be the new MP for Makerfield. And in terms of the candidates, you know what I'm going to say next. There's a list of all of the candidates in the Makerfield by-election on the BBC News website.
He's playing with fire as well here, because tech and AI companies are a big part of the government's plan for economic growth in the UK. They have invested millions, billions of dollars, not only in their UK headquarters, which are generally in London, but also in infrastructure and building data centres, that sort of thing. And on the one hand, you've got him sort of telling them off and reining them in and rightly saying that they're not protecting children. That's a big thing to throw at a company, isn't it? And on the other hand, we're trying to welcome them to the country. And, as one former government advisor put it to me, there is no plan B. We need the money, right? We need them to be here. We need them to think that this is a good place for the UK, for these companies to come and grow and thrive. So he's got to really walk a very fine line, I think, in order to manage to deliver both of those messages. And I guess the question is, will we see them quietly start voting with their feet in the future if they feel that actually they're not getting the market here that they used to have? And the other obstacle that he faces, and will face later on today in a few hours' time, is in the shape of Donald Trump, who is very protective of his US tech companies and has railed before against foreign countries, as he says, trying to regulate his tech businesses. Don't know what he's going to make of this. I know he's been kind of busy, but he might not be very happy about it.
More on that shortly. But also, Zoe, there's an example of a bit of tech protectionism from Donald Trump already this weekend. And that didn't he say, under national security rules, Anthropic cannot use their new AI model Mythos in other countries because he wants to keep it for the States? Yes,
absolutely. This is really significant. So Mythos is, well, if you believe Anthropic, this incredibly powerful tool that can spot weaknesses in security systems before any human does. In tests, it found one that had been hidden in a system for 27 years. There's a slightly more measured review of it from the AI Safety Institute, but it is still a very good tool. And companies, banks, financial institutions worldwide are clamouring to get hold of it because they want to see how secure their systems are. Restricting it to the US kind of creates a two-tier security system for the world, doesn't it? Those that get Mythos and those that don't. It is a very powerful message to send. And it's interesting that actually there's no UK banks at the moment that have access to it already.
And Henry, just a last philosophical point, and this is a ridiculous question to ask you, especially after you've been up since 4 o'clock this morning, but it's about timelines in politics. And I was just thinking, oh, wow, this social media ban has come around in the UK really, really quickly. Obviously not quickly enough for lots of campaigners and people who've lost their children in horrible circumstances. But you compare that to the online safety bill, which is a kind of set piece bit of legislation for handling the online world, which took years and years and years to come into force, started under David Cameron. But then part of me was thinking, well, hang on. When I was a baby journalist on Newsround, we were doing cyberbullying in 2004. So actually, it's taken 22 years to get to this point. So I'm not sure, is this proof of politics moving quite fast in the modern age, or politics moving quite slowly in the modern age? Or is it a product of actually the politics will just generate what it needs at the time? Do you see what I mean?
It's an absolutely brilliant point, and
I've been
asking myself a similar question over the course of the day, because, as you say, there's been a sort of tone in some of the reaction from those who've been campaigning for this of, well, at last the government has listened and done this. And I completely understand, given the harrowing experiences that many of them have had, why it feels like this is only at last. But in terms of where the political consensus was and where the political consensus now is in Westminster, I mean, I think it's one of the fastest shifts I've seen in my time covering, my decade or so covering politics. Because genuinely a year ago, Sir Keir Starmer was making the argument privately to Labour MPs that, as the parent of teenage children himself, he had seen them experience the benefits of social media. And sure, there were Labour MPs who were frustrated that was his view, but he was not some sort of out there aberration. He came to be because of how fast the political consensus moved. And there's all sorts of reasons that we could talk about another time about why that might have been the case. But I think you should never underestimate the fact that MPs are people too. And many MPs are parents too. And just as there appears to have been a shift over years, perhaps rather than months, among parents about the ills of social media for children rather than the benefits, I think the same thing has happened in Parliament, because they're kind of downstream of that broader societal trend.
And Zoe, I'll give you a bite of that question as well. I'm just wondering, as you walked into that Edwardian townhouse from which our country is run, and where I would not be surprised if there's still a working fax machine, did you think, oh, I'm here in a place that is actually finally getting to grips and getting approximately to the same speed that the tech is developing?
I'm going to answer that question with a parenting reference. I'm a parent myself. And when your kids are small, it's like the years go really fast. You can't believe they're suddenly 5. And yet equally, some days you can't believe it's not lunchtime yet. I think those two things are true. It's moved both slowly and quickly. Facebook didn't launch in the UK until 2005, which is 21 years ago. So we've had 21 years of people growing up with this. Somebody in the briefing with me made me feel very old by saying that they couldn't have got through school without YouTube. I didn't have YouTube. I was at school. But,
2005.
It's an important resource for lots of people. And yet it's also become this double-edged sword, hasn't it? And a cause of harm. And I think regulators always struggle to keep up with tech because it moves so much more quickly than they do. I mean, how many years have you and I sat here discussing the Online Safety Act, and then it launched and, oh my goodness, it doesn't have AI chatbots in it because, in 2016, when that all started, we didn't know what they were.
Yeah.
So that's always going to be a struggle, I think. But I think there's another point here, which is about society. The way in which people behave online is arguably a societal problem. Is it actually a technology problem? I had a message this morning which began, right diagnosis, wrong cure.
And we will still see, and I'm now going to be treading on dangerous ground here, parents on their devices in restaurants while their kids in 4 years' time are not necessarily on their devices. Well, they won't be on social media, but they could still be on their devices, couldn't they? Anyway,
I tried to have a go at my son for his screen time, and he threw it right back at me and said, "Mum, what's yours?"
Right. Newscast is turning into a parenting podcast now, which is great for me. Zoe, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Henry, good to catch up.
Thank you.
Now, on Monday, we all woke up to the news that the US and Iran had signed a so-called Memorandum of Understanding, which means they will have a 60-day ceasefire in their conflict, and which paves the way for more negotiations about lots of the thorny issues between the two countries, whether it's the access to that crucial waterway, the Strait of Hormuz, whether it's the future of Iran's nuclear program, or billions of dollars of Iranian money that is frozen in financial institutions around the country. There's lots to think about here, and all of this was happening as Donald Trump was hosting a UFC Ultimate Fighting Championship cage fighting contest on the lawn of the White House. So quite a juxtaposition there. And the person who's going to talk us through it all is the BBC's chief international correspondent, Lyse Doucet. Hello, Lyse.
Really good to join you, Adam.
I've not seen you for a while.
It's really about, yeah. Am I on your,
No, you've been on your travels
Okay.
for various reasons, which we
Yes.
can discuss offline. So just tell me how this story has unfolded in the last 24 hours.
well, as a measure of this moment, the reports came through that Iran did not want the deal to happen on Sunday, June 14th, because that was President Trump's 80th birthday. So they didn't want to give him a birthday present.
Right.
So you saw when it happened just in the last hours as President Trump was, that cage fight was going underway, thrashing it out on the White House lawn. And then it was the next day in Iran. So Iran could say, well, we didn't do it on President Trump's birthday.
Right.
I mean, that was part of the timing. But there was also the fact that there was Hezbollah had fired, we think it was drones. Israel retaliated in Beirut. There was a concern that this would derail the progress. Then there was a flurry of negotiations with the Qatari mediators and the Iranians. Iran is said to have asked for something from President Trump not to retaliate. Adam, there's always this kind of messiness in the final stages of a deal. But what we're seeing in this one is on another scale. And even now, as we speak, as we're recording now, 2:00 in the afternoon, there has been an announcement from Washington, announcement from Tehran that they have reached an agreement. Pakistan, one of the mediators, has also said there's an agreement on all fronts, but we're not sure what Israel's going to do in Lebanon, and we don't have all the details about what actually has been agreed.
Well, yeah, hence why when we were just watching our colleagues on the news channel on the TV here in the studio, and on the caption, the words peace deal are surrounded by inverted commas.
It's a misnomer to call it a peace deal. It's about ending the war, ending the hot war. The hostilities remain. All of the toughest of issues are still to be negotiated. This is, I know it doesn't sound good in a news headline, a memorandum of understanding, a framework for further negotiations. What will be the fate of Iran's nuclear deal? How will the Strait of Hormuz, how will that be controlled? Is it really going to be a free flow? Iran doesn't see it in that way. What's going to happen? Ballistic missiles don't seem to be, from what we know, doesn't seem to be on the agenda. The U.S. said they wanted it. That certainly those Iran's neighbors who've come under ballistic missile fire, Israel wants those on. What about Iran's proxies and partners? So there's still a lot. There's still a lot that could go wrong, but let us emphasize how important it is that there is, call it a peace deal in inverted commas, call it an end to the war. I think there was a collective sigh of relief because people have been warning that, energy experts, financial advisors, if it went through the summer, the global energy shock, the global shock in food prices, the hunger crisis would have been on an even deeper scale.
So it seems then that what they've agreed that's definitive is another 60 days of ceasefire. And then they're going to sign a piece of paper in Geneva on Friday that commits both sides to basically having more talks about some of the issues that you mentioned there in that list.
So
That's basically all we've actually really got today.
But again, those details haven't been confirmed. But as we record, the prevailing view is that it will happen on Friday, that it will be in Geneva. J.D. Vance, the U.S. Vice President, said that it's likely to be him. He even suggested President Trump, who will be on this side of the world. We don't know how long. He said he could also come. We understand it will be the lead negotiator for Iran, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who's the Speaker of the Parliament. We don't know what's going to happen in the meantime. President Trump, in one of his Truth Social posts, basically said the oil's going to flow. Get your engines going, but it's going to take a lot longer to open up the Strait of Hormuz. And Adam, I'll just mention 2 points that are we still don't really have confirmed confirmation about what actually has been agreed, at least in this first phase, is that there was a report that Iran has agreed that for the next 60 days, that traffic through the Strait of Hormuz will be toll-free, and that there will then be what's called a regional dialogue to decide about what kind of system will be put in place to patrol the traffic, etc., to monitor the situation. But Iran is already in talks with Oman, and whether you call them tolls, President President Trump said no tolls or services. Turkey has a similar arrangement. And
Well, I heard
yeah,
one of these academics at the university in Tehran who's sort of closely aligned to the regime saying, oh, well, we could have a pilotage fee because like countries like Denmark make you get a pilot on board your ship to go past their coastline.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's not
so
a
there's
toll,
going to
but it
be
is an extra cost.
Iran does not. That's a red line for Iran. It's not going to give up. What is it for it? Not just a gift of geography, but a gift of this war. The fact that it can maintain some control over the Strait of Hormuz. The other one is about the cash. President Trump, other American officials say there will be no cash for Iran. There will be no American money.
Basically, because there's all these frozen assets.
100
in
billion,
American
it
banks.
said, estimated around the world in banks, other central banks, and in reserves. Some of it is Iran's oil sales. But we understand that Iran wants cash up front. It wants, and this is because it's in a dire economic and financial strait for all of its bravado, but also it just doesn't trust Trump and President Trump. And whether or not, whatever you think of Iran, it's like they say, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean people aren't out to get you. President Trump pulled out of the first landmark nuclear deal, which was agreed in 2015 under President Obama. In the last previous rounds of negotiations which were proceeding, were shattered by American-backed wars with Israel. So they don't want surprises again. They want proof that America is going to carry through this time. And for them, part of it is show me the money. And part of it is a deal that locks in the United States.
And then what do we know about the fate of Lebanon in all of this?
So the statement by one of the chief mediators, Pakistan, the Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, said that it was a war. It was a ceasefire on all fronts, including Lebanon. The foreign minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, said all areas of Lebanon, in other words, Beirut and southern Lebanon. But from Israel today, across the political spectrum, there is criticism saying the United States cannot dictate our policy. The defense minister has said we are going to continue to operate in Lebanon, no territorial limits, no time limits. The far right-wing minister, Ben Gvir, a national security minister, has been even more categorical. We are not going to agree to this. But before I joined you, Adam, it's very interesting. I read a report by a very well-respected observer in Lebanon who said that as a result of this deal, there's hope that there can be discussions among regional players to come up with a political kind of process that they can deal politically with the issue of Hezbollah's guns. Because the Lebanese government has said they want to disarm Hezbollah, but it's very hard for them to do it when Beirut is coming under fire, when southern Lebanon has been, more than 1.5 million people have been on the run, so much, more than 3,000 people killed. It's just not propitious for those kinds of discussions. So I just read this as, so maybe a little bit of light in this dark, but certainly one of the many weak pillars of this is what's going to happen in the Lebanese front. And Iran has continually made it clear this is not just a bargaining chip. It's not going to cast away Hezbollah. Its links to Hezbollah go right back to the creation of Hezbollah in 1982. And now the links are personal, they're political, families marry each other, they're religious, they're institutional, and they're hand in glove, and they're not going to simply cast them away.
Yeah. And did you see the interview Donald Trump did with the New York Times on Sunday? So it sounds quite bizarre how it happened. Like his family were getting ready for his birthday dinner in the White House. He was getting ready to go and see the Ultimate Fighting Championship out on the lawn. He calls up the New York Times for half an hour. And part of that conversation is him thinking very big thoughts like, oh, maybe in future, the security guarantees that the US provides its Gulf allies should come with an actual price tag or a share of the economic activity in the Gulf going forward. And that was me thinking, okay, is that classic Donald Trump just kind of riffing on something and not having any constraints on what he uses his imagination to do? Or is this part of his sales pitch to the American people for why they've basically ended up with a situation that's maybe slightly worse than the situation before the war? He's trying to justify all of this to his voters.
There certainly is a chorus of criticism saying, what was this war all about? Was there really an imminent threat from Iran? President Trump continues to say that had there not been a war, that Iran would have would have used a nuclear weapon, and Israel would be destroyed in 2 hours. That's what he also says when he lashes out against Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that has been extraordinary. This is really a turning point moment between these two very close political allies, and in the history between the United States and Israel. But President Trump is under pressure to prove that spending billions of dollars, burning through all of those American munitions in a war where he never achieved what he set out in that first 8-minute video, which was that they would destroy Iran militarily, and that once the war was over, people should rise up and take control of their government. It would be the best chance in their lifetimes. So that hasn't happened. But more importantly, we're going to hear this a lot from President Trump. We already are. New York Times mentioned how often he mentioned it when they spoke with him, that it's a better deal than Obama. 2015 deal. Iran agreed to 3.67% enrichment. Under this new one, it has to be better than that. In fact, there will be a suspension of enrichment. They've got to decide how many years that would be. What's going to happen to the highly enriched uranium? In 2015, the uranium was only enriched to around 20%. 97% of that was sent to Russia. Now it's 60%, and Iran is refusing to give it to the United States.
So it's getting closer to the
so
level
many
it
are
needs to be at
saying,
for a weapon.
and also that even though a lot of the oil that the Americans use doesn't come through the Strait of Hormuz. The prices are set globally, and American voters are starting to feel it at the petrol pump and in the supermarkets. And just the fact of there being a war. He is, after all, the president who vowed to be the president who stopped wars, didn't start them. And he's kind of, dismissed it. Oh, I don't care about the people suffering. Oh, oil prices aren't so high. But he's going to have to, and he's a master at this in terms of wordsmith, spinning this to be the victory. He'll talk about it, as he already is, about the greatest peace deal in 47 years between Iran and the United States. But when you get down to the reality of it, for the people of Iran who wanted to see fundamental change, they're worse off than before. The people of the United States have taken a hit, and people worldwide have suffered, and some very, very painfully, because of this, because of rising food prices, oil prices, shortages of food, shortages of a lot of what we do rely on for our daily lives.
And what about those other countries in the Gulf, like the United Arab Emirates, for example, or in Qatar and Oman, places that were on the receiving end of the Iranian retaliation? And people have been saying, oh, that's their business model as countries and destinations for foreign investment or foreign immigration and highly skilled workers. That's gone now because of this. Is that how they feel, or are they sort of breathing a sigh of relief? They're like, oh, actually, we've got through this. It's back to business as usual, kind of.
Months ago when you and I sat here, just after February 28th, I'm not always right, but I described it as a before and after moment, that the region would never be the same and Iran would never be the same. And this is what has happened. And I predicted that when the war ended, there'd be big posters in the underground saying, come to Dubai, and Dubai, buy as much as you can. That model has been shattered. And the United Arab Emirates has gone from being furious because more than 50% of the attacks during those months of hot war were against the UAE, and Iran has been focusing on the UAE because the UAE nailed its colors to the flag of Israel and the US, made it absolutely clear which side it was on in Israel, and Iran took note of that. But they need to have stability. They cannot change the geography. There have been reports of high-level discussions between the Emirati leaders and Iranian leaders. There was even a report, which was denied, that the UAE gave a huge sum of money to Iran to say, please, stop attacking us. We've got to find a way to live together. And there will be a split in the Gulf. Qatar as well was furious. They felt betrayed. It's for that reason that they were not involved in the initial mediation, why it was Pakistan and then Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt. But of late, in fact, in these last, I mentioned earlier, intense diplomacy, Qataris who have more experience on this file, negotiating, they have now recognized that they can't literally say, we're not going to be part of this. We're not having nothing to do with this. They have to. They have to find a way to live together. And of course, what Iran's long-term ambition is, and it keeps repeating it, is that the Gulf states have to understand that those American military bases make them less secure, not more secure. And its long-term vision of the region is a region where Iran is going to take more of a role. Now, that's certainly not how its neighbors see it. And I don't think they're going to want to say to the Americans, you can go away now, because these relationships are their defense, their arms deals, transfers of technology, their ties that bind are deep and crucial. But it's going to be, these are big, big questions for the future, but there will have to be talks. And the region will want to have a say. But the region will also be unhappy that ballistic missiles don't seem to be on the agenda.
And is your agenda going to Geneva on Friday?
What flight should we take, Adam?
I'll be watching the Makerfield by-election.
Yes. Is it going to be interesting on Friday? We'll see what happens but maybe you'll interview me on Friday from Geneva. There'll be
we can compare notes.
Yes. That's which is going to be could be existential for some people here in Britain. But the deal, once it's signed, it's for all of the complications that we discussed. It's really, really important that it has happened, for all of its weaknesses and fragility. It's got to start moving in that direction. Too many people in too many countries, and for people who don't have the wherewithal to survive these shocks, are really suffering.
Now, for something completely different, have you been watching the World Cup?
I do love watching the World Cup. I think a long time ago I was a commentator on the World Cup in Africa.
Were
the
you?
Africa Cup, yes, when I first started in the BBC.
We need to get you doing some commentary.
No. I just
Maybe
think
when
it's
things are quieting
it's
down.
a lovely celebration of, and of course, Canada, which is where I come from. Canada, Mexico, the US. Canada tied its first game, a draw. I saw Scotland beating Haiti. So it's starting to get... I've been busy with this story.
Yes, understandably. Well, no, the reason I ask is because we're doing a thing called Supporter Reporter, where we're trying to find a newscaster in every single country that is represented at the World Cup. So we've got 48 to find.
Do you have a Canadian yet?
I think we do, yeah.
Okay.
You put yourself forward for that?
You need
There we
someone?
go, tick in the Canada column. So we've got a message from Robert, who actually emailed us when we started this feature a few months ago. He says, I listen to Newscast every day. I'm English, but I live in Ecuador.
Oh.
He says, domestically, he's an Ipswich Town supporter.
Okay.
But what he's most pleased about is that all the matches are generally in his time zone.
Oh.
So lucky you, Robert. And we had another message from Claes Bertelsen, who's in Stockholm in Sweden, who says, listening to Newscast on the speaker on the balcony in Solna, which is a suburb of Stockholm, awaiting Sweden's first match with their English manager, Graham Potter, at the ungodly hour of 4 a.m. on Monday. Work is going to be fun, says Claes.
There's been a lot of controversy around this World Cup about very high prices, about the United States borrowing from Somalia, some of the players and coaches in Iran. But there's the hope that once the beautiful game starts being the centre of attention, that all of this will fade away. And we've seen that. We saw in Qatar, for example, there was a lot of controversy then. So this is a hope, because I really am a big believer that sport can bring people together. And it's something, given all we've been discussing, these are moments of joy and bliss and happiness. I like to see happiness.
Yes. Well, let's see what happens when Iran play their first match, because that's against New Zealand quite soon, isn't it?
Yes.
Right, Lyse, thank you very much.
Good to see you, Adam.
And that's all for this episode of Newscast. A reminder, you can listen to us as a podcast every single day of the week, and we can be downloaded from BBC Sounds. And we'll be back with another Newscast very soon. Bye-bye.